All right, in this lesson, we'll be talking about string interpolation, which is the process of inserting content within a string. But before I get to that, I wanted to show you a new method that we can call on a string. So for example, let's say I have something up here like P5, and I'm going to output this to the terminal to the right, the atom runner. We can see that this is in fact a number. A number has methods, much like a string has methods. For example, a couple lessons ago, we looked at the method called next, which gives us one number greater. We can see 6 shows up there on the right. The next method on an integer simply returns the integer that is 1 greater. Well, an additional method that is available on a number is called toS. Now, toS is a method that actually involves an underscore. You can see that it's following that Ruby best practice, just like in variable names, of having lower snake case, which means separating every word with a underscore. But toS is just like any other method. It's just like next on a number, or just like length or uppercase on a string. And what toS does is convert the number to a string. So what result we're going to get back, the return value of that is going to be a string, and then that string is what P is going to output, so we can actually see, when I execute this, on the right we're going to see 5 show up here in quotes, and remember those quotes with P are a perfect indicator that we are in fact working with a string with the character 5 rather than the number 5. We can see here that it appears here in quotes, so this toS method has converted this 5 integer on this line to a string object, and that's what is being output. We'll dive into the toS method a little bit later in this lesson. I'm just going to delete this now and return us back to a blank template. As I mentioned, this lesson revolves around interpolation, string interpolation to be exact. And to interpolate something means to insert it between something else. String interpolation is the process of injecting content into a string. Now, this content can be anything from a variable to an expression. In fact, when we're dealing with variables, what we'll see is that the data type that the variable is pointing to doesn't even need to be a string, and string interpolation can inject it. But let's take a look at this in action. What I'm going to do is create a variable called name, and I'm going to assign it to a string called Boris. Pretty simple. If I output name, you can see Boris appears. No issues there. We've covered this a few lessons before. Now let's say I want to write something like this. Let's say I want to use the value in the name variable in another string. Let's say I write something like hello, name, how are you? Now my intent here is to really insert Boris, which is my string that is stored in my name variable, within name here. However, predictably, when we execute this, Ruby is going to interpret that string literally. So it's literally going to write, hello name, how are you? At this point, Ruby is just looking at this as 4 characters, N-A-M-E together. It has no clue that we are referring to, or want to refer to rather, the name variable, which is storing my name. So string interpolation can solve a problem. That's exactly what it's built for, to be able to inject something like a variable into the middle of an existing string. So here's the syntax. The syntax is to write a hashtag, and you can see, in fact, Adam has automatically created the curly braces after for me. But after the hashtag, we write a pair of curly braces. So curly braces are available to the right of the P letter on your keyboard. You have to press the Shift key. And Adam, as always, is helpful here, so it's automatically inserting the ending closing brace. But these are the curly braces, and they have to be written after the hashtag. If you're working with Adam, it may automatically start typing it for you in a .rb file. So thank you, Adam. But once again, it's just going to be the hashtag followed by an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace right here. Now, within that construct is where we can write something like a variable name. So now when I write name, this syntax, these symbols are going to tell Ruby that we want to inject the value of the name variable into the middle of this string. So now when I execute this, we're going to get what we want. And we can see name is going to be replaced with Boris, which is what name is pointing to right here. And that's simply going to be injected, or interpolated is the proper word, into the middle of this outputted string. As I mentioned, one of the cool features of interpolation in Ruby is that Ruby will automatically convert the data type of the interpolated value to fit it into the string. So let's take a look at another example. Let's say I have a variable here called age. I'm going to set it to 25. And let's say I want to output I am 25 years old using the age variable to substitute that number of 25. Well, here's kind of the old-fashioned way to do it, the really roundabout, heavy way. I can do something like I am. At this point, I would have to do something like add a plus to concatenate. I would do age. Now, if I do this at this point, I'm going to run into an error. This is a slightly familiar error. We've run into it in the past. But in this point, we're trying to add a number or an integer to a string, and Ruby is not going to be able to convert it, so it's going to run into an error. So in order to get it to a string, we have to convert that number to a string. As we saw a couple minutes ago at the start of the lesson, there is a convenient toS method that we can call on a number or an integer object, and age is a variable that, again, is pointing to an integer object. So that's going to take care of that problem. Here we can see it starts appearing here, I am 25. Then we can add another plus to continue concatenating, a space, years old, and we can see we have I am 25 years old appears here. But this is kind of syntactically ugly, right? We have to have two plus signs in there. We have to put our spaces in there. We have to remember to do that. We have to call the toS method on our variable that is storing an integer in order to convert it to a string. It's kind of a difficult way to do it. Interpolation easily solves this problem. So what I can do here is write P. Again, the same thing. I'm just going to emulate what I did above. I am. And then I'm going to write that same syntax of hashtag followed by curly braces. So hashtag curly braces. In my case, Adam automatically adds the entire thing once I write a hashtag within a string. But here is the syntax. And then within it, I can put 25, space, years old. And when I execute this, you can see we're getting the exact same result. Compare how much shorter this line is compared to the one above. It's much easier to type out. Now, what's great about it is you'll also notice that we didn't have to call the toS method on age, even though age is a variable that's storing a number. So what's great about string interpolation is that it automatically converts the data behind the scenes to be able to fit it into your current string. When we're simply concatenating, we have to convert it to a string in order to perform the process of string concatenation. In comparison, when we're interpolating, age is automatically converted. Makes things simpler, makes things cleaner, makes things shorter, all things that we want to aspire to when we program. Now here's another great feature about string interpolation. These braces don't just have to contain variables, they can contain calculation. For example, I can do the result of adding 1 plus 1 is, and I'm going to write the same syntax, hashtag followed by curly braces, and in here I'm going to write a valid Ruby expression, which is 1 plus 1. So what's going to happen here is Ruby is going to evaluate this part first. It's going to get 2, which again is going to be an integer, not a string. But because it is interpolated, Ruby will automatically convert it. And we can see out here, we're going to get the result of adding 1 plus 1 is 2. So that entire calculation and conversion has occurred because of that string interpolation syntax. In fact, we can combine things like operations and variables. So what I can do is something like, in 5 years, I will be, here I'm going to open that familiar syntax of hashtag curly braces. I'm going to put age, and if I simply put age in here, which is my variable, it's going to give me 25 here. But I can do age plus 5. Because remember, at this point, age is still an integer, so we can take 25. We can add 30 to it. That will be the complete operation within those curly braces. Once that operation is complete, because of that string interpolation syntax, Ruby will automatically convert it to a string and inject it or interpolate it within my larger string right here. And I can say in 5 years, I will be that years old. If I calculate this, we can see it appears in 5 years, I will be 30 years old. That's the result of adding 5 to 25 and then interpolating the result in the middle of the string. We're also not strictly limited to having only one variable interpolated. We can interpolate multiple variables. We can interpolate one variable multiple times. Let's take a look at an example of this. I'm simply going to define two variables, x equals 5 and y equals 8. And I can output here p. The sum of x and y is hashtag curly braces, opening and closing, and inside I'm going to write x plus y. Again, both x plus y, the variables point to integer objects, so Ruby is first going to add them to get 13, then it's going to interpolate that result into my current string, which is going to force it to convert it to a string object in order to do that concatenation, but we don't have to remember to call the toS method on the result because interpolation takes care of all that, makes things easier for us, and we're going to get the sum of x and y is 13, output right here on the right. So as we can see, string interpolation can be particularly helpful when it comes to injecting values, whether it's variable values or even calculations, into the middle of existing strings. So I'll see you in the next lesson.